In this episode, you finally get to meet one of my arch nemesis of speaking, Joze Piranian. And we had to reschedule this interview so many times because I don't know who does this, but he last minute had to go to Lebanon to perform in a comedy club. That's the type of caliber performer that we're dealing with today. Joze, for those of you that don't know him, is after a lifelong of battling a terrible stutter, he has overcome that to become a TEDx speaker, the Grand Slam champion of Speaker Slam in 2017, beating me and taking that from me, and has been able to perform at some of the world's most prestigious comedy clubs, including the Laugh Factory out in Chicago, the Broadway Comedy Club in New York, and the Comedy Nest in Montreal and Absolute Comedy in Toronto. This was an incredible episode, especially if you're interested in comedy, especially if you want to become a better speaker, and especially if you need a dose of inspiration. This is I Will Teach You to Speak. For those of you that don't know my guest, he is using a breathing technique to control a stutter. Joze, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for those that do not know you, one of the most endearing aspects personally that I see in you is that you are extremely witty and you have great comedic sense. Would you be able to start off just showing us, giving us a little bit of a taste, if we don't know you, on what your performance and what your comedy would be like on stage?
Sure. So I'll typically start off my performance at the comedy club by addressing the obvious, which is my sexy voice. And I say, hi, everyone. I stutter, so if you have any plans in the next 48 to 72 hours, cancel them. That's one of many intros I use as an opener to break the ice and address the obvious. And then my material, some of it can be about stuttering. I have a lot of jokes about that, and a lot of jokes about completely random different topics. So one of them is an observational bit that's a bit surreal. So I say, I have an addiction to cold pressed juice. And a quick note here. I could have said juice, but what's the first syllable in the word cold? When I say I'm addicted to it creates that expectation in the minds of the audience that this is going someplace else.
Okay, that makes sense.
And really, it's the element of surprise between expectation and reality that inherently creates humor.
Okay.
So in that sense, humor is a corrective mechanism that detects a discrepancy between the expected uh, and the actual. And, and then laughter is the physiological response.
Okay.
But anyway, I'll go back to my joke. So, juice tends to be the most expensive when it contains superfoods, which makes me wonder, when a fruit gets promoted to the elite status of a superfood, does that fruit get offended when it's forced to hang out with regular fruit, say in a smoothie? Like, I am Sir Goji Berry the Fifth. Where do you find the moral fiber fruit, get it, to blend me with these peasant pears?
Nice.
Yeah, so that's one of my observational, like, how do you
Observational, yeah.
Observational
Yes.
jokes. And lastly, I sometimes have one-liners which are a lot quicker, so it can be a pun or a double entendre. So one example is, I'll say, do you know who the most demanding activists in society are? Homeless people. Not a single day goes by without them asking for change.
Nice.
So it's, of course, the word change has two meanings. Yeah.
Couple questions for you about that. First and foremost, if you could start off with like the origins. When did this start? When did you feel like you had a knack for comedy? And then also for people that are thinking about getting into stand-up or trying to write jokes. I have a couple friends in my immediate circle that have expressed interest in doing stand-up, and they just like, they say they've been writing jokes, they've had the idea of doing it, but they haven't gone out and done it. So number one, when did you start? How often are you writing to make sure you have consistent content? And then for those people that want to get up there and they want to do something like that, what would you recommend for them?
So I had done an intro to stand-up class at Second City in Toronto. I would say I would recommend some type of an intro class to get familiar with the basics
Yeah.
of comedy.
Okay.
One common misconception is that someone who is funny socially will automatically be funny on stage.
Okay.
And I've always seen, especially at like amateur comedy nights, you'll sometimes see this person trying stand up for the first time, and they show up with a big group of good friends,
Nice.
and then they're on stage, and the only people in the room who are laughing at their jokes are the friends they came with.
Yeah.
And there is a very logical reason for that. If you had to guess, what would you say the reason is?
The reason why their friends are laughing?
Yes.
Well, they're probably laughing at them.
No, so assuming they do think the stuff is funny, why, in your opinion, would they think it's funny?
It's possible that it's the same style or types of jokes that they use in their social circles. And maybe they don't go to comedy nights that often. So the people that are there, that are at comedy nights often, are expecting a different style of delivery or a different style of joke, and they're not getting what they expected.
Yeah, I could see these two being factors. The one that I first think of is the fact that if you know someone personally, you'll naturally contextualize everything they say based on what you know about them and their personality. So if someone goes up on stage and says something like, last Saturday I partied until 7 in the morning, it's not really funny at all. But if the group of friends know, for instance, that this guy or this girl never ever goes out, then that's some context that they have about them, and then it makes that same material sound different.
Funnier than it is. Okay.
Yeah. So you can't assume that anyone in the audience knows anything about who you are.
Okay.
And you have to take full responsibility in building that comedic world, which basically consists of, you start off with a setup and then a punchline. And the punchline typically has to be something that is not expected.
Okay.
If you have a setup and then you say what everyone is thinking, there's no surprise and thus no comedic effect, right?
Okay.
So one is, don't assume that anyone knows you.
Okay.
So things have to be funny by themselves and not in relation to who you are and your stories. Now, once you become an established comedian, then you can reach that phase where you have a distinct voice.
Yes.
And people will laugh if you say a simple thing because they relate that thing to everything else they know about you. So 2, think of jokes as a science. It's a setup and a punchline. And sometimes you can add a a tag, which basically is a second mini punchline after you've done that first punchline.
Okay. So you're trying to
So
go for a double laugh?
yeah, if I say, if you think my speaking is bad, wait till you see my handwriting. It looks like that of a 3-year-old doctor. Then it's like the punchline is almost split up into into two mini punchlines,
Okay.
and the last step in terms of how to get started is to address the elephant in the room as soon as you are on stage. It's as if people think address it, address it. So if you are extremely tall or extremely short, or you stutter, or you know your voice sounds a certain way, very whiny
Mm-hmm.
or low, if you just tell your jokes without addressing it, it creates unreleased tension in the audience.
Okay.
Comedy is about creating and releasing that tension through laughter.
Okay.
And if you ignore it, people will have it in their minds. Why is she not addressing this? And then on the other end, if we embrace it, exaggerate it so much more than it actually is, joke about it, people get that comic relief. And then you can all move on as one, as a stronger entity that feels a lot closer,
Okay.
and even closer than if you did not have that thing in the first place.
Okay, fantastic, man. I feel like that's a great start for those that want to get engaged, like Comedy 101. There's a couple there. Make sure that there's some sort of surprise, the expectation versus the reality. Know that the joke itself needs to be inherently funny and that people in the audience won't necessarily know context about you and your personality. There was address the elephant in the room, and I'm gonna have to make sure I go back to capture all those because there was like 4 or 5 really good gems there. I really appreciate that. I want to shift gears away from comedy a little bit. And I want to discuss some of your own philosophy around speaking and overcoming obstacles and your stutter. I know that you've had to have overcome a ton of obstacles to get where you're at, where I've seen you over the last 2 years, starting at our Toastmasters Club. You were already a really strong speaker, but overcoming the stuttering as a speaker to go on to do comedy all over the world, to be a TEDx speaker. This weekend, you're going to be at the Archangel Summit, which I'm super excited to be there and cheer you on. I'm really pumped for you to be on that stage. And the reason I bring all those that obstacle up and then being able to rise over that is that Stoic philosophy says, the obstacle is the way. And you've been very well known to say the only way out is through. And so I'm curious, how can we use those philosophies to help us overcome whatever our own internal stutter may
be? That's a great question. One word, actually. Exposure.
Okay.
I find we are notorious as human beings for wanting to avoid pain and discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I avoided it for the overwhelming majority of my life. In the second year of university, believe it or not, I asked a few of my professors to exempt me from presentations and from participation. Socially, I avoided speaking. I even missed events, so I remember once as a teenager back home, we had this big holiday gathering. The whole family was supposed to be there. Like, everyone, the cousins and the uncles, the aunts. I felt so insecure and self-conscious and anxious about stuttering and feeling so inferior every time it were to happen, that I pretended to have a cold. So I started to pretend to cough at home, and I told my mom, "Oh, I'm feeling really sick. I can't make it tonight." And they insisted. They said, "No, but it's the holidays. You have to be there. Everyone is coming." So I had to pretend even harder that I was so much more sicker. And it's not like I avoided it for a cool reason because I had a date or because I was going to hang out with the boys or something along those lines. I was literally so terrified of speaking. So the same concept of exposure to fear can apply to all insecurities or all fears.
Okay.
If you are overweight but don't wear a bathing suit at the beach, you are allowing that inner stutter to hold you back. If you want to talk to someone that seems interesting or that you might want to befriend or go or date even potentially, and you don't do it, it's still that same fear of the fear of rejection, the fear of being judged once the world finds out who you really are. So I would say in one single sentence, just expose yourself. Well, that sounds a bit weird. Expose yourself to the very thing that is at the source of your fear, because the brain, and specifically the amygdala, which is the center for fear,
Okay.
and for fear and reward, I think it can only learn through direct experience.
Okay.
No amount of logic or inspirational quotes can have that same impact as exposure.
Okay. Candidly, watching you over the last couple of years, you're a huge inspiration for me. You beat me at every contest that we ever competed in. And so after all these accolades, and I only have a couple other questions for you, but after all these accolades on your belt, you seem invincible. I'm just curious, you've gotten over the stutter, or you're constantly working on the exposure to make sure you're maintaining getting over the stutter. Do you have any insecurities anymore? Is there anything that can hold you back at this point now that you've been able to taste what it feels like to overcome the stutter?
It's interesting you asked me this. I was talking to a friend from my speech therapy program a few hours ago, and I said, if I don't put in the work constantly, it feels like a shell starts to organically form again. So I've had a lot of ups and downs even in the past 1.5 years. With all of the achievements came a lot of downs. You have seen me at Toastmasters sometimes, a few months ago, a year ago.
Yeah.
When I had reached some downs where I was unable to say one word without stuttering.
Yeah.
And it feels surreal to think about it now.
Yeah.
The fear is always there. It's almost waiting to creep back up.
Okay.
In a lot of ways, I am still the same boy who was terrified of even saying hi to his crush at school, due to being terrified of stuttering and having her laugh or having the school laugh. Or I would say that tendency to some extent exists within me, and I have to constantly work on it. Every week I'll challenge myself to talk to between 50 and 100 strangers.
Wow.
By asking questions or directions on the streets.
Okay.
Or at the mall. It's tough every time I do it. But every time I do this exercise, I feel like I'm facing that innate tendency almost. And as long as the trajectory is upwards, it's okay to have the occasional down.
Yeah.
But one thing that is not okay is accepting defeat.
Yes. Love that, man. Well, you've come to the club a couple times and talked about fluctuations. And so as long as, like you said, that the trajectory long-term is positive and it's going up, that's really all that matters. I remember, just as a side note, the week before your TEDx talk and you came to the club, that was one of the worst that I've ever seen your stutters. It was so bad, and we were hardly getting to the meeting, and everyone was like trying to cheer you on because they knew how important it was to you. But overall, at the end of the day, it turned out great because your TEDx talk was amazing. But yeah, as long as it's that upward trajectory over time. Speaking of Toastmasters, maybe it's not relevant. If it isn't, that's okay. But I'm curious, just as one of the last two questions here is about some mentors or some of the influences that you've had over the last couple of years, whether it was a comedy, public speaking, anything. Anyone really made a significant impact on you, and any lessons from them that you can help impart on us?
Is it cool if we take a washroom break?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Let me pause this.
All right, cool.
And we're back. Okay, Joze, we're talking about mentors, influences, and the wisdom that you can impart on us.
Yes. So I cannot speak about my public speaking journey without mentioning both Toastmasters and Speaker Slam.
Nice.
Toastmasters was the foundation of how I got into public speaking in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But Speaker Slam is what made me realize that beyond public speaking as a mere exercise for me to improve my speaking,
Mm-hmm.
Speaker Slam is what made me realize that my story can have an impact. Because the whole time before Speaker Slam, I had been going to Toastmasters on and off for maybe 7-8 years.
Oh, wow.
In Montreal, a bit in Lebanon, a bit in Mexico City, and then Toronto. So, but this whole time at Toastmasters, I only view it as an exercise for me to expand my comfort zones and challenge myself. So, one, Toastmasters as a foundation, two, Speaker Slam for the insight that public speaking can be a means to deliver a message that can impact others while also still serving the purpose of self-improvement.
Yes.
Regarding specific mentors, well, I have not directly public speaking, but of course the co-founders of Speaker Slam,
Yep.
Patrick and Nina Organelli.
Yep.
A few awesome speakers. I have gotten some mentoring from, like Blake Fly.
Mm-hmm. Blake's awesome.
Yeah. Bobby Umar, Karen Donaldson.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I'm forgetting a few.
Classics.
And in terms of influences, I had seen two talks on TED when I was preparing for mine. And one of them is by Nick. It's the guy with no arms
Okay.
and no legs.
Okay.
It's a Slavic last name.
I'll check it out and post it in the show notes.
Cool, yeah. His talk is absolutely mind blowing. And then there's a talk also on TED by uh, Isaac. I believe his first name is. He is blind, and his talk is also amazing.
Okay. I will link both those.
And lastly, I will say, and not because of this circumstance, but you have definitely been an influence uh, on me. You're a great speaker. Every time we cross paths at a speaking gig or competition or just our regular Toastmasters club, I learn a lot from you.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you. I'll always take the acknowledgement. Won't say no. The last question I've got for you, and I like to take my guests here, is to talk a little bit about what's on your heart right now. Anything that you want to share. I'm really conscious that I direct the interview, and there may be things that we didn't get to touch on that's really important to you, or that you think would be relevant and resonate with this type of an audience that's interested in comedy and public speaking and getting out of their comfort zone and overcoming their own stutter. Do you have anything on your heart you want to share as closing remarks?
Yeah. Sometimes we really don't feel like doing something. Why would we do it? It's uncomfortable, annoying, and inconvenient. The alternative is so much better. Netflix, a bag of chips, a 10 to 15-hour binge of a TV show.
Yeah.
Those things are so much better in the short run. In the long run, it's the worst decision ever. I'm I'm not going to end with a cheesy line about doing one thing that scares you every day. What I will urge people to grab fear by the balls when it shows up, recognize it. I mean, even now, before a stand-up performance or a public speaking one, here comes the sun. And before a speaking one, my physiology reacts almost the same way it reacted before my first one.
Okay.
But what changes is my relationship to fear. It used to be fear equals no. Fear equals no way, Jose.
Yeah.
Now it's fear equals yes way,
Yes,
Jose.
Jose. Awesome.
So when the fear shows up, breathe in and walk through that fire.
I didn't expect anything less, my friend. Speaking of Yes Way Jose, everyone should be following Yes Way Jose on Instagram. And if you happen to be an event planner or organizer, you're looking for someone to speak at your school, Jose is the man for the job. If you want the combination of inspiration and humor and comedy, something that I don't have. So if you're looking for that, it's not me, it's this guy. Give him a shout, follow him on Instagram. Jose, I really appreciate you being on the show. You're a constant inspiration to me and many other people. Excited beyond all hell to see you on Saturday, to cross the stage at the Archangel Summit and absolutely crush it. So thanks for being on the show, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me on. It was a real pleasure. Keep on working on this awesome project, and I'll see you on Saturday.
All right, later, brother.